So, what do I start on next? I guess I can start with I'll start with Thailand because that's something that people also don't see a lot of the time. So, other countries outside of the first world do in fact exist. This is a shocking revelation to some in America in particular. But one such country is Thailand. It's not just a nebulous black hole of child slavery where you sometimes see cool T-shirts and stuff get made. It is also a country with politics, and they have elections. Granted, as is the case with a lot of what we would call, sometimes rightly, third world countries, its elections can be fraught with issues and sometimes not even mean that much, like at all. But they do happen, and they do have the virtue of being politically useful for some, like indications of what people think, even if they don't yield any meaningful legislative results. They can tell you how the political winds are changing. That being said, we have an article from Al Jazeera here. Thailand election results. Opposition trounces military parties. So it is a military dictatorship, and they have like sham elections kind of where other parties can gain votes. But every time this has happened, there's just been a coup d'etat right after. So keep that in mind as we go into this. Youth-led Move Forward Party takes a stunning lead as Thai voters say a resounding no to military royalist elite. Now, don't be fooled by the name Move Forward Party. This is not the Forward Party that Andrew Yang has pitched. They are actually a liberal to social democratic party that has a real political platform. They're not in a vacuum. They're not as left as would be ideal, but given the circumstances, I think they're doing great with what they can muster in terms of political resources. So in Bangkok, Thailand, TOS abound. Thailand's reformist opposition has won the most seats and the largest share of the popular vote in a general election after voters resoundingly rejected the military-backed parties that have ruled the Southeast Asian country for nearly a decade. With nearly all votes counted on Monday, the Progressive Move Forward Party and the populist Pheu Thai Party were projected to win about 286 seats in the 500-member House of Representatives. This would, just on its own, give those two parties enough seats to just govern by majority coalition outright. They wouldn't even have to, assuming this works at all like a regular coalition democracy in the West, these two parties would be able to just dismiss the military party out of hand as they sort of lockstep party line passed reforms through, which in this case, because they are a liberal and like somewhat left populist bloc, I would say is a good thing. But let's read on here. But uncertainty remains about whether they would be able to form the next government due to skewed parliamentary rules that allow 250 members of a military-appointed Senate to vote on the Prime Minister. So, I'm assuming the Senate also has 500 members or something like that. Whatever the case, the military, as is the case in some modern military dictatorships, the military, as per the Constitution, has a guaranteed number of seats that they are not allowed to be given less than. So even if the military parties did not win a single vote in the elections, they would still have a certain percentage of the seats, thereby guaranteeing a disproportionate amount of representation. That means MFP and Pheu Thai will need the support of smaller parties to establish a new administration. Okay, so then that means in this case the military is guaranteed half of the representation in the legislature. So they would need one more person from a different party. The biggest winner of Sunday's vote was MFP, a progressive youth-led party that contested the general elections for the first time on a bold platform of reforming the monarchy and reducing the power of the military by rewriting the country's constitution and ending conscription. Yes, in addition to being a military dictatorship, Thailand is a monarchy. They don't just have like a functionally a king that they pretend isn't a king. They have an actual king with a crown and everything. And they have very strict laws regarding what you can and can't say about that king, which is very unfortunate. But here we go. With 99% of the votes counted, the MFP looked set to take the biggest share of the lower house. Oh, it is bicameral. Never mind. Scrap what I said earlier about the whole guaranteed half representation thing. Biggest share of the lower house with a total of 147 seats, according to preliminary results. The figure includes 112 from the 400 seats that are directly elected, and 35 from the 100 seats allocated to parties on a proportional basis. So it looks like they have a hybrid system where some of the seats are done by proportional, like, nationwide vote, and some of them are done much like we do congressional elections here, where they have constituencies that vote for a candidate as opposed to a party. It's probably pretty convoluted, but you know that kind of system isn't the worst thing I've seen. Military dictatorship and crutch representation notwithstanding, the royalist military parties fared poorly. You don't say. I'm shocked. I tell you. Imagine the surprise on my face. The United Thai Nation Party of Prime Minister Prayuth Chan-o-cha, who seized power as army chief in a 2014 coup of state, was trailing in 5th with 36 seats. His former party, was a different one, Palang Pracharath, was 4th with about 40. So they still have a certain number of seats, but, you know, again, they cheat. By having that provision in the Constitution be like, no matter how many votes we get, we're guaranteed at least this many seats. People saying that it's a very impressive victory for the Move Forward Party and this populist party. And apparently there was record turnout in this election as well, which is good because I like when there's record turnout. When people vote, that's good. So they might not get the prime ministership because the prime ministerial position requires a supermajority of votes, which I doubt any of the military parties would be especially happy about. Okay, yeah. Despite Move Forward's triumph at the polls, Thailand is likely in for an extended period of uncertainty. And this is because that coup that I mentioned, these coups of state, have been responsible for the continued presence of the military parties in government. Wouldn't you know it, people generally don't like a military dictatorship being in power. You know, it's a genuine shocker, like I said earlier, but they tend to exercise pretty undemocratic means of control. The significant thing here is that the margins that this party won by are so significant this time as opposed to last time. The MFP and PTP, the two like center to left parties, won by so many seats more now than last time that it has some thinking that even if the military attempts a coup, it might not be successful. You know, coups have been pretty bloody in Thailand in the past. They've resulted in the expulsion of a lot of people from legislatures, military marching through the streets and all that. I don't think there have been a whole lot of outright pogroms, at least not until you go back to like the mid 20th century, but still not great. But this time, if there is enough coordinated resistance, not even necessarily for a big change in one direction, but like solidly against the military, then the efficacy of an upcoming military coup is questionable, to say the least, or so I think anyways. Which could be good, and I think that would be good if it were to happen. If the military were to have a failed coup, you know, it's pretty, like, I have no reason to believe as of right now that the military, in the position of power that it currently is in, with all of the institutional crutches that it's currently leaning on, I have no reason to believe that they won't attempt a coup because they've done it before and it's worked out for them before. But at the same time, there's also no reason. There's there's not as much reason for me to believe that the coup, should they attempt it, would be successful this time, because of the newly increased amount of opposition to the military government. And indeed to the monarch, but you don't get a really great sense of that outside of Thailand, because, again, they have extremely strict laws regarding what people can and can't say about the monarch or the monarchy in Thailand. And goddamn, I got my ass kicked by that trainer. I think Ledian's just not having a great time at this point in the game. Now, if I return to the Thailand story briefly, I want to go over the best and worst possible outcomes from this. Regardless of whether the good ending or the bad ending happens, people are not going to take kindly to the military probably ever again. I think that the sort of genie is out of the bottle on people being openly skeptical of the military government in Thailand, and for that reason I think its days are numbered. Because while fascist and militaristic governments don't rely on popular support per se for their remaining in office, they do rely on a certain degree of popular complacency, where people might not necessarily like the government, but don't have the political will to collectively do anything about it at the moment. That climate, where it is possible for dictatorships of that sort to thrive, I think is well and truly gone in this instance. So with that in mind, the bad ending is the military does another coup and just brute forces it way harder than they've ever done before. You know, like all of the amount of force that would have been necessary for the coups throughout the 20th and early 21st century and more, you know, pogroms in the streets, massive, like, arrests and executions of opposition people, opposition leaders, politicians, etc. And they basically dispense with democracy because it's no longer convenient to them, it's no longer useful to them to have some sort of veneer of popular representation, because if they do that, then there's a chance that they lose. That's one possibility. And that's, I think, the worst possibility. And in that case, we would actually eventually see a full-scale revolution, I think, because much like what the cops do, the military government here wouldn't be solving anything. All they would be doing is exacerbating the current state of political tension and then trying to put a lid on it, which, I mean, there's only so much tension you can induce into a political climate and keep the lid down, even if you are a military government. Eventually that's going to burst over. But then the good ending, the thing that I see also potentially happening, well, shouldn't have had him out front, is that they still attempt the coup. I think whatever happens, there will be a coup attempt. And they fail. I think that, you know, in this situation, the coup doesn't necessarily go as planned. You know, things go wrong. The military isn't able to exercise the hold that it once had over the country. And all of a sudden, Thailand might not make the jump to democracy right away, but they would probably look significantly better than they had before this round of elections. And the military would sort of be left to lick its wounds in some way, shape, or form. Does that mean they would be out of power entirely? Even in the good ending, I don't really see that happening, because they are a military. Militaries, by definition, have a lot of political leverage because they have a disproportionate amount of force at their disposal, legitimized force. You know, it would take some serious restructuring of the military to sort of combat that, and I can't help but think that a lot of more hardline conservatives in the military would be very opposed to that. Although, whether or not they could actually do anything about it might be a different question. So, on that note, just to conclude, I think Al Jazeera's reporting on the issue is correct in that there's going to be a significant degree of uncertainty in Thailand's immediate future. But I also think that that's a good thing, because a bad outcome that is certain is less preferable than uncertainty that could potentially result in a good outcome. You know, stability only takes you so far as a positive when the thing that is stable is awful and horrible. So liberals winning elections in military dictatorships is good, actually. And I have critical support for the Liberal Party here. And by critical, I mean like basically uncritical, but they're liberals, so I'm contractually obligated to dislike them because they're cringe. And with that, I guess I bid you adieu in the segment, and good luck and Godspeed to everybody out there in Thailand. It's going to be rough for the next several months. But despite the fact that I contractually am obligated to hate liberals, I do sometimes find myself sounding like a liberal with how much I talk about elections. But that's because I think elections are part of the way that, well, it's part of the way that political power gets doled out, and that's one of the easiest ways for somebody to obtain political power. And while I just got done talking about the Thai elections, there is another high-profile set of foreign elections going on. In fact, even more high-profile than the elections in Thailand, and that would be the elections that are currently going on in Turkey for the presidency and the parliament. Erdogan, as you probably know if you have any awareness of like geopolitics, but if you don't, that's okay. Erdogan is a tin pot dictator. He is an asshole. He is cringe. He's a liberal, and he gets no bitches. Okay, the one about being a liberal isn't really true, but the one about getting no bitches is true. And he also has exhibited a particular disdain towards democratic institutions in Turkey ever since his initial election in 2000, I think 14, I want to say. It's been a while since he's been president. And he sort of cemented his direction of the country towards authoritarianism after an attempted coup d'etat in 2016, I believe by Islamists. I don't know what it was that led Islamists in Turkey to believe they could actually attempt a coup d'etat and succeed. I don't think Turkey was in a political climate that would have really lent itself to that, but it's possible there's something I don't know, and that's a whole nother discussion that I don't really want to get into. But what I do want to get into is that part of this authoritarian backslide in Turkey, much like in Hungary and other places, has been the state control of media institutions. Erdogan has used the media as a tool to sort of make himself at home in the presidency by, basically having state news agencies do PR work for him. Much like Putin and the Russian news agencies. Seems like authoritarianism everywhere obeys a relatively similar model. But in this set of elections, that's sort of being tested. There's, for the first time since I think he initially took office, there is a cohesive opposition bloc that is formed against Erdogan. They don't agree on much outside of that, but man, do they ever not like Erdogan. And there has been record turnout in this election, as is the case for many decisive elections. So, I am usually loath to go to CNN because their recent direction has been, hey, we should report facts less and do conservative agitprop more. But that's what we got right now. We have there are two major candidates, Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu, running for president in this election. Erdogan, as of right now, most of the votes have been counted, and the Turkish Office of Elections, the Supreme Election Council, I believe it's called, has said that Erdogan is at about 49 point something percent, and Kılıçdaroğlu is at about 45 point something percent. So it doesn't look good for Kılıçdaroğlu, and there's another candidate who is at about 5%. So theoretically, if the remainder of voters who voted for the other candidate all mostly go to Kılıçdaroğlu, then it is possible that Erdogan could just outright lose the election. Now, in this case, similar to Thailand, I believe that Erdogan would attempt a military coup if he loses. but it might not even get to that stage. Unlike where in Thailand the elections already happened, right now the election currently is happening in Turkey. And since no one breached the 50% threshold, then we are currently going to a second round of elections. Much like other developed countries, Turkey has a system where if no one candidate breaches 50%, then the top two go to the next round, wherein those are your only two choices, and one of them would therefore have to reach 50%, purely by way of votes being cast. The issue here is that where this is, of course, the prerogative of many a dictatorship, Erdogan has just been like kind of cheating. He's been having supporters of his have been going and allegedly committing large amounts of election fraud at the ballot boxes, doing what's known as ballot stuffing, where you have multiple ballots that are, filled out with false information or are blank or whatever, and you basically stuff the ballot box for a given candidate. You artificially you inflate the vote count for a given candidate. It seems like Erdogan is trying to cheat to win. And in this situation, unfortunately, I am forced to say, why wouldn't he? There's every indication that he could get away with it. This election, while it could be the chance for the opposition, the political opposition, with everybody from the center right to the far left, to sort of reject Erdogan's far right party and return to more democratic norms, it could just as easily, and I think more likely, be the last, dying breath of democracy in Turkey, at least for a good amount of time. Kind of like the representation system in Thailand, I don't think Erdogan's government has any reason to keep actually any sense of legitimacy in its elections anymore because of, if he loses, then there's not much point from his perspective. But I think another thing that I could transpose onto Turkey from Thailand is that the discontent following this election, if what I think is going to happen ends up being the thing that happens, where Erdogan either cuts it very close and still wins, or loses the vote count and just installs himself anyway, people are going to know that there's been some foul play abound, and they're really, while they might have no choice but to accept that Erdogan's going to be the president for the time being, it's safe to say that nobody will put their blind trust in the system anymore in Turkey, at least as a general rule. There's going to be an unprecedentedly high level of skepticism of Turkish elections and any semblance of democracy in Turkey after this presidential election has come and gone, especially if Erdogan is wildly unpopular and somehow still wins, with rumors of ballot stuffing and things like that. Again, it's the sort of unfortunate situation with a silver lining in that democracy in Turkey is done, but at the same time, social tensions are going to have escalated to an all-time high, and that's going to mean that there's only so much that Erdogan can do, and for so long, to keep a lid on the tensions that are going to start bubbling up to the surface in Turkey. People are really not going to be happy with this. And eventually, people will start being a lot more militant in their demand for fair representation in government and things like that, especially if the material conditions lend themselves to that. If life gets substantially worse in Turkey on a material day-to-day level, which it probably will, then people will, possibly in my lifetime, people will start massively rejecting Erdogan's dictatorships, shall we say. I think we've all seen the horrendous story of the earthquake that happened in the southeast of Turkey and in the north of Syria that killed more than 40,000 people. Actually more than 50,000, I think, most recent death toll indicates, and only had a death toll that high because Erdogan's government was extremely corrupt and gave passes to certain developers to basically ignore the building codes, or they paid off the inspectors to not inspect, or were not timely with their inspections. Basically, incompetent administration stuff that typically is associated with a nepotistic authoritarian dictatorship. So more of that is going to happen, and people are going to see more of that happening. It's going to more directly impact them, especially if there's another earthquake in the future. And we're basically eventually going to wind up back where we started, where there's like mass demonstrations in the streets, and eventually Erdogan will be gone from power. We ought to keep in mind as well. He's getting old. He's 69 years old, which I would say nice, but in Erdogan's case, he gets no bitches, so it cancels out. So, you know, it's just one of those stretches, I think. Anyways, that was a mouthful. Godspeed to all the folks in Thailand and Turkey. I actually might make this just like a double feature. And cut the segment there, I guess.